Hello, everyone. This is Chris Shepard, Artistic Director of The Complete Bach. This is our next installment of ChatJSB with Emi Ferguson, who is going to be performing on Friday, July 25th at the Brick Box at the JMAC with Ruckus. You're going to hear more about that in a second. So excited to have you with us. I just wanted to open with the craziest of coincidences. I'm actually in a hotel room in Warsaw. I've been touring with many members of the Worcester Chorus actually for the last little bit. And I'm in Warsaw to see our old friend Marty Sedek, who has written music for us. And he is the conductor of the Masterwork Chorus in New Jersey. And I know that a lot of you guys follow this whole project. And it turns out that Marty knew Emi when they were very young and went to the Berklee College of Music summer program together. Why do I start with that? Because although the coincidence, Emi, was crazy when we talked about it before our heads exploded, but it's an interesting place to start in terms of what it is that you do, because it was not at all surprising to me that as a young musician, you were exposed to jazz, to improvisatory music making, because as this huge star of the next generation of period, largely Baroque, but we'll say period instrument playing, you have brought this freshness to your approach. And this is what all the reviews seem to say is that it's so dazzling and so brilliant, but also that you have made early music cool. Now, as somebody who's thrilled that period music has been the refuge for dorky people like me, why did you have to make what we do cool? And so I want to hear about that journey, how you brought cool to Baroque music. Emi Ferguson.
Oh, I think it was always cool. I mean, we talk about flute players. I mean, you had Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull quoting Bach's, lute suites, and those are the things that I remember getting requested from a very early age when I went out busking on the street trying to like earn a couple quarters to, have as pocket money as a 10-year-old. But so I think Baroque music has been cool for a long time, and that's why it's sort of stood the test of time because people keep coming back to it. And of course, to the music of Bach, because it has such incredible architecture that it really does sort of transcend genre, transcend instrument, to just be this sort of like wonderful structure that we can all see ourselves in.
Oh, I love that. And I need no convincing. I'd forgotten that. Flute had this real moment in the 1970s in
Oh,
pop music.
yeah.
I'd forgotten.
I would
Um,
say the food's been having a moment for 50,000 years, but I am biased. But it is the oldest, melodic instrument that we have records of, an actual 60,000-year-old bone flutes. And it's been found in cultures from all around the world. So it's, for me, again, I'm biased, but I really think it's one of those instruments that holds a very unique and special place in our cultural DNA, not just here in Massachusetts, but all over the world. And the sound of the flute, and especially of a wooden flute, like the Baroque flute, I think really does hit a different place in our bodies because as a society and as a species, we've been listening to it for 60,000 years.
that is really cool. I hadn't really thought about that, but obviously all these great figures of Greek myth and uh,
Yeah.
can you take us through this? The idea of the different kinds of flute, the rediscovery of the wooden flute and how important that is for Baroque music, for the music of Bach, and how it feels so natural and idiomatic. Because I'm not sure that everybody who's viewing this realizes that just as violin playing has changed so much by the rediscovery of period technique, boy, the flute, it's just completely different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had a conversation with some colleagues last week about sort of, well, is the period performance, does it have to do with what you're using, what type of instrument, what era it's from, the equipment, or does it have to do with the person and their understanding of sort of the ethos of the music? And I was talking with a friend who was working with a young student who had a Baroque, this was a violinist, had a Baroque bow and Baroque violin. And yet when they went back to the modern violin, a lot of those same techniques were really challenging for them. And it sort of turned into this whole conversation about how our equipment or our architecture really does inform the art that gets made. And so for us, it's really interesting to use the equipment that people were using, at the time that J.S. Bach was composing, because it informs then how we play. And of course, humans have changed and we know different things that people knew back then, and they knew different things that we know now. But how we interact with these instruments, I think there's probably quite a similarity between those times, and certainly how, a bow that has, a fine tip might react versus a modern bow, or a flute that has no keys and is made of wood reacts versus the modern flute that most folks know of today, which is really a very new instrument. Many of us all grew up, and the only thing that we saw was a silver flute. Of course, James Galway really brought the gold silver flute, to the masses in a really, really phenomenal and exciting way. And that's the image that I certainly grew up with. I saw, flutes in paintings from olden times and just kind of wrote it off because the flute was a silver, sparkly, keyed thing. But that really only became sort of adopted universally, and even that is a stretch universally, but in the beginning of the 20th century. So in the grand history of the 60,000 years of the flute that most of us know today is this wild, crazy new contraption. So when people started experimenting with going back to this concept of Baroque instruments, around in the 60s, it it wasn't actually that long before that tradition, had been remnants of it were around. I will not say that tradition was around, but remnants of it were around. And it's really cool to see all of the color and sonic possibilities that you get when you do dive into this music with these instruments. Now, of course, I said before that Bach's music can withstand all sorts of different things, and that's the beauty of it. You do not have to play Bach on a Baroque flute. You can play Bach on a modern flute, and it's equally wonderful. In fact, I've heard his flute sonatas played on clarinets, on French horns, on cello. Not the cellos don't need any more solo
No,
sonatas
they've
from
got
Bach,
those bloody
but they
sweets, don't they?
play the flute partita, which is kind of amazing.
Emmy,
Um,
can I tab that because I want to come back to that because I personally think that's a really fascinating topic. Um, so I'm going to make a note and come back to that because I think that's a really
Sorry, I can go on forever.
cool observation. But my question for you, did you grow up in Boston?
I moved to Boston when I was 10.
Okay.
So
So the funny thing is, there you were at the epicenter of
I know.
period playing in America. Um, I'm wondering, when was the first time you ever heard a wooden flute live? And so you're seeing somebody play it. And what did you think?
So my teacher from when I was 10 to 18 is an incredible flute player and teacher named Judy Grant, who runs the Boston Flute Academy now. And she was instrumental in exposing me to so many different things. And she said, "You are going to go and hear a concert. Um, and this concert is going to be the Mozart Flute Concerto, but it's going to be on a period instrument, on
Oh,
a classical
oh,
flute."
right.
And this was when Jacques Zune was principal flute of the Boston Symphony, and he also plays period instruments. So he was the one playing on this classical flute with, I think it was with Boston Baroque.
Yeah.
It was in Jordan Hall. And I remember going and I was like, what the, like, I don't understand how he's doing this. I don't think I really even comprehended what was happening, just like that seems crazy.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, okay, cool. And that was my first experience. That and then driving, I would drive along Route 9 every day from my house to go to school. And we'd pass Von Hune workshop, which is sort of, again, like a big epicenter of flute and recorder making in the early music world. And I remember, I think I must have been 11 or 12, and my mother went in one day because she was like, "Oh, there's a recorder on the outside. Maybe they have flutes or something." She went in there. She came out. She said, "No, I don't think this is for you."
Do you know what I love about that?
Wow, I hang out there all the time.
Yeah.
So
I should confess, as my people who have heard me do these know, I wrote my PhD on the period right when uh, original instruments, as they called them, exploded on the scene.
oh my gosh, amazing.
Which is really fascinating because it changed quickly. But what I loved about what you said is people in retrospect like to make it seem like there's like the light bulb goes on. I heard period music for the first time and my life changed. Many people that I've talked to, it's more like you. It's like, okay, well, that's okay, but it takes it's so different. The sound and the ethos around that kind of music making, it takes time to get used to. Plus, here you are working on your sound on a silver flute, and they're really not all that similar. Can you talk about the ways in which they are similar and the ways in which they are different when you go between wooden and silver?
Yeah. And I would just say to that before I answer your question, like I was a teenager and I was focused on playing in youth orchestra and going and playing in my jazz ensembles at Berkeley. So this was suddenly a whole new aspect that I was just, kind of like, whoa, okay, cool. File it in the back, but I don't even know how to even get into that. So, um, sorry. Say your question. Now I'm
So
ready.
the difference between playing them and then related how you came to that. I presume it was at Juilliard and how different they are that to go from one to the other.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing for people, I mean, hold on one second.
I think she's going to play something for us, everybody.
Show and
How
tell.
exciting is this?
The biggest thing that's different is that the Baroque flute has no key, well, has one key, practically no keys. Um, so, oh boy, but so you can see it just has six holes here. Well, I didn't put it together properly, but and then one key down the bottom. So the biggest difference is there are no keys, and the keys were added by performers and instrument makers over time to help facilitate chromaticism. If you look at music of the Baroque era, while the harmony, certainly of Bach, is incredibly chromatic, very thorny, melodically, it's rarely chromatic and certainly not for the flute. A great exception of that is the musical offering trios sonata that is based on this incredibly chromatic theme that Frederick the Great sort of challenged Bach with. But that's really an anomaly. But as time progresses, people start to add a key here and there so that you can facilitate more chromaticism. By the time you get to Mozart, one of the hallmarks of his music are, chromatic scales going towards the end of a cadence. And so then it becomes a lot more standard. And as you get into the Romantic era, more keys were added to make it even more possible to play different chromatics and go to different key centers. So much so that the instrument like really couldn't withstand all of these basically things that were added on, ad hoc essentially over the period of, 150 years. And that's when the flute makers and instrument and performers at the time sort of said, we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to throw everything out and start from scratch and reinvent something that can incorporate all of these keys and really make it into this like fantastic flying machine that the modern flute is. And that was Theobald Boehm in the mid 1800s. And that took a while to sort of catch on. His instruments, he experimented with lots of different, like using wood with a new key system, using metal with a new key system. And it was the French that really adopted what we know of as the modern flute today. the sort of, silver or metal instrument with this, very elaborate key system. And the, Paris Conservatory did the huge, big, like PR push, essentially, commissioning so many composers, including like Debussy, Ravel, to write for this instrument, as well as making sure that the next generation of flute players coming out of the Paris Conservatory were all playing this new flute. And that's really what translated as well to Boston, which is sort of the flute center of um, flute makers of the world. And so Boston became known for creating these amazing modern flutes that, allow different kind of facility. They're both wonderful, and they require different things for a performer. You have to know different fingerings for each one. So, it's basically like playing two completely different instruments that, are part of the same ancestry and lineage. I often liken it to, this is like if you're really good at riding a horse, and the modern flute's like, all right, you've got, your F1 car, something like that. They're both going to get you somewhere, but how you use it is very different. And the skills that you need to be able to use it are very, very different. And someone who drives an F1 car isn't necessarily going to be able to like get on a horse and do what they need to do.
So what was it like having been such a proficient modern flute player to learn how to ride a horse? Did you just take to it quickly?
It's very humbling. And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of modern flute players who are really curious about playing the Baroque flute, is that you get onto the instrument and suddenly it's like you're a beginner again. And that's really hard for people who are, either professionals or in advanced, studies in school, to suddenly be given something that makes you feel like you have very rudimentary skills. But I think it's one of the best things any musician training can do. And it's, of course, one of the incredible hallmarks of a music education degree, having to learn a little bit of every single instrument. And I wish that conservatories also ask this of their students, because it just creates so much more empathy and understanding about like what actually it means to make music. And so I think for me, this was that outlet of like, whoa, okay, this is completely different, but it's a challenge. And I love a challenge. I'm very curious. So I was really excited about what just to sort of like see how it unfurled. And it's become a very big part of my life. I still play modern flute equally as much. In fact, all of my performances for the last 2 weeks have been modern flute.
Oh, right.
Um,
What kind of repertoire do you tend to do on modern?
well, I did a complete Brandenburg's musical offering on
Oh,
modern.
right.
Did,
Oh, God. I
uh,
didn't realize that you did Baroque
yeah.
music on mod. Now that's very cool. That is very
And
cool.
it's so fun, and
Mm.
I think a lot of folks call me to do that as well, because um, they know that I do Baroque flute and that I understand the ethos of performance practice from doing it, regularly, and can apply that then, when I'm playing on modern instruments. So it's that's really fun. And so some of that, then world premieres of music by friends here in New York City at Lincoln Center. So it's
Now,
always.
this lets us go back to that tab, and all of you people out, our big dorks out there will love this, which are who are legion. This is we all love Bach together, but it is one of the most salient things about the music of Johann Sebastian Bach that I find really, really fascinating, and I was so excited that you mentioned it. There is by far the majority of music of the Baroque, particularly earlier in the Baroque period, that you will never understand unless you play it on period instrument. Because it's just so, it's idiom, the music itself is idiomatic to the instruments themselves. But Bach transcends that. You honestly, I've yet to hear And I mean, it might take you a second, but you could even listen to one of the sonatas on kazoo, and if it was played beautifully, the essence of the music could still come out. But there's other stuff like, as a choral person, you really shouldn't be doing Monteverdi on modern instruments. It just doesn't, like, the essence of the music can't be transmitted. Do you agree with that? And do you want to say anything about that? Because I think there are a lot of Baroque composers of flute music that you've encountered that most of us wouldn't even know the names.
I think I'm curious what you think as well. I've always thought that the ability for Bach's music to do that resides largely in the fact that he is an organist, and that he is thinking about all these different colors, and he often would write towards an instrument, but I can't say that he ever wrote idiomatically for the flute in any of his sonatas, like especially even as he got older, they get less idiomatic. Um, and so I don't think he was ever saying like, all right, how do I make this as accessible or easy or written for this instrument in, the most perfect way. I think he was writing music that spoke to him and he chose the voices that he either had accessible to him in his sort of circle, or that he felt were the right ones to express that. But I think it's also clear looking at his music and how he would take different things and then reorchestrate and put it on different instruments. We have a great example of that in our show Fly the Coop, where Bach's C major flute sonata, the second movement is, well, I would say it's a copy paste, but I think it came first, of the fifth variation from the Goldberg
Oh, right. I didn't
variation.
know that.
It's just in C major rather than in G major. And it's always fun to see like, oh, look, he's doing it. He's taking his own music and retrofitting it for the moment or what he needs, or because he's short on time, or because it was a good idea,
Or
or
because
because he liked
the
it.
player was sick that day.
Yeah, like and we have great stories of his wife, who's a beautiful singer, saying, I love this cantata, like cantata 82.
Too.
Um,
Yeah.
like that's originally for was it bass and oboe? And she said, I really love it. Can you make a version for soprano and flute? And so,
So
that's
there
so
it, there it is in the notebook, right?
right. So, the fact that he was taking requests from his, family members and friends, as well as seeing the possibility that, and it's also just practical. I mean, the man was writing a cantata every week, had his own, 13 children, as well as all the kids he was in charge of at school. I mean, it's a wonder that he wrote as much music that he did, and also a wonder that he didn't copy and paste and reuse more of it.
Well, he was just clearly a workaholic. That observation, by the way, everything you said, I totally agree with. And because I deal with the choral music, I deal with this issue of to everybody out there, it's called parody, although it's not like an SNL association. Parody just means reusing something. And it's just, not only is it fascinating that he does it, but it's fascinating how he does it, and that he will reinvent it. He, like you say, it's not a cut and paste. He will use different, almost even a different affect to a certain extent. In any case, this seems like such a terrific pivot, because to what it is that you are doing, what you're doing with Ruckus, to Fly the Coop, to the concert in Worcester, that the very fact that you love that aspect of Bach, that just really interacts perfectly with what you are doing with Bach's music, sometimes presenting it exactly as it is on the page, and then sometimes having to, forgive the pun, but fly the coop, a flight of fancy, of vol au vent. Can you talk about that? And these, I believe, five members of Ruckus who are just absolutely extraordinary. I'm a continuist, and nothing excites me more than continual playing where they just take crazy risks. And again, just for our audience at home, Bach never writes down what the continual player, the keyboard, or it might be lute or theorbo, one of that, is supposed to write. He gives you chords just like in jazz, and you can do anything you want with it. So how cool that you've done what you've done with it. How did that happen?
So I think I am a very strong believer in, and I know that my colleagues in Ruckus feel this way too, that period performance shouldn't just be how do we get as close to what people were doing in the 1700s as possible, because it's not realistic. If we were to do that, I would not be allowed on stage. I would not be allowed to play a flute, which women were, really frowned upon to play. And so, amongst many other things that I don't think we want to be that dogmatic about our period performance. But what I really like, and I think the members of Ruckus really like too, is this idea of performance practice as a living thing. And so Bach, as you said, was a master improviser himself in his music, in the music of the time. It was expected that everybody would be improvising within the structure of what the composer sort of gives you as a starting off point. And I think there's a quote somewhere that Bach said, no piece of mine is complete until the performer puts their part on it. And that I think is truly the essence of it. And so when we come to these pieces, we are doing the performance practice in the, most by the book way. The members of Ruckus are reading the figures and looking at the bass line, and I'm playing the obligato melody that Bach gave, and we're reacting to each other within that. But we're also opening up possibilities of, well, what happens if we infuse a little bit of music that we have been privy to, in the 300 years since Bach? As you mentioned, I, as a teenager, spent my summers at the Berklee School of Music in like a lot of Latin jazz and salsa bands, fusion band. I mean, it was so fun. And so, like, how can I it's impossible for any of us today to ignore
Yeah.
all of that music that our nervous systems have absorbed. And it's, I think, for us, antithetical to who we are as musicians to try and stamp that out. Because that's incredible music. And I think if Bach were living today, he sure as hell would be infusing everything into his music in the way that he did back then. He was always putting in pop music, folk music, jokes. We see him as this very serious man, in that one portrait with the wig. But
Yeah.
I mean, he's he was funny from what we can gather a lot. I mean, serious at other times, but had a sense of humor. And um,
Well, I
I
have a
think
lot of, I'm a church musician. I have a lot of church musician friends who, in the silo of their church music, are serious people who otherwise are absolutely hilarious and make different
so
music.
same, he
The
was
guy who wrote the peasant cantata and the coffee cantata, how could you ever say that he doesn't have a sense of humor? You know?
absolutely. So I think that's sort of what led us is that these are not sacred works of Bach's. These are secular works. We have no record as to why he wrote them, or who played them, or where they may have played them. He may, for all for all we know, have sort of written them over breakfast, or written them to play at the local coffee house down the street with some really good university students. And if you're thinking about him wandering down the street to the coffee house, which was a nighttime event, not like a morning event, um, uh, he would have been surrounded by young people. They would have been having a good time, and maybe, just maybe, he would have said, "Oh, we've got six continuo players here. Let's have them all join in the jam and see what happens." Um, and that's sort of where we ended up with. And so in Fly the Coop, there are three continuo and flute sonatas that are sort of the pillars of the program. And we go in actually in chronological order. start with his E minor sonata, which, was written around the same time as like his big passions. And it has the same kind of like weight and gravity and beauty that those very intense pieces that he wrote sort of at the beginning of his tenure at the St. Thomas Church have. And that we approach with a lot of reverence. And then we move to his C major sonata, which many folks say Bach didn't write because when they looked at the continuo part, they said, wow, this looks really basic. Uh, the melody, the flute part really seems like Bach. And of course, there you have the Goldberg variations right in the middle of it. But the continuo part is really, yeah, not very weird for what Bach was known for at the time. And so what many scholars have arrived at is that actually for that piece, it was a solo flute piece that he wrote earlier in his career, probably around 1719. And he used as a training piece to teach CPE Bach
Oh,
how to add accompaniment to an existing melody. And so it was basically a homework assignment for CPE, which is why you have, a much more rudimentary bass line as he was just kind of like learning how to do this. And so we use that as a jumping off point. So, okay, like he's teaching his child with this piece. Let's add our own new bass lines or, change some things around so that we are, in essence, like Bach's children as well, and learning from what he's given us in the other pieces and then spinning it into our own thing. And then the last sonata on the program is his E major sonata, which is from 1741. And this is like very, very different style to a lot of his writing. And so we use that then as an invitation to really, that sonata is incredibly infused with different styles from like uh, Israel. I can't pronounce his last name. Incredible Kamakoili or Hawaiian
oh,
ukulele.
yes, a ukulele player.
Yeah.
Oh,
So there's some of that in there. There's like string band hoedown in the second movement. The third movement was inspired by these incredible Rosemary Clooney recordings that I found that feature the harpsichord. Her singing like Mambo Italiano, which has this insane harpsichord part. And so that I like stole and set, to our keyboard player. I was like, Elliot, I need you to do your best impersonation of this. And he like made it his own and like took it to a whole nother level, which is really fun. So
that
that
helps
one,
me to understand the recording, by the way. There were some things I was like, "Oof, I wonder where that came from."
what's that? Yeah, I was driving from Vermont one day and I heard it on the radio and I had to pull over, and wait until, I could find out what it was and totally obsessed. So people have been experimenting with these old instruments, for a while and coming up with cool ideas. And so this is not only an homage to Bach, but also an homage to all of our musical ancestors who have sort of created us as musicians today.
Well, I could talk to you forever, and I look forward to meeting you in Worcester. But I think that is such a great sort of dot to put on the end of the sentence. I mean, this just is going to be such a great concert. If you guys have not listened to the recording, it's up to you. Either listen to the recording or just kind of don't, and then go on this kind of wild journey. And I imagine that seeing you all in person, just I just imagine the collaborative nature of it, so that God forfend, it even looks like you're having fun playing Bach, which of course it should always look like you're like. I have to keep all my orchestras and choirs know this. My favorite, Wesley Hall, who's a great continuist in Worcester, he kept making me laugh in our last concert because he would do these awesome, crazy little things. And I feel like, well, that sort of should be what it's like. I mean, Bach played with his family, whom he loved. He was very close to his family. And despite that rather dour portrait, I think he loved music and loved people and loved life. He didn't love his bosses, but that's a whole other chat, JSB. So as we say, Friday, July 25th at JMAC. Tickets online, musicworcester.org. You can see everybody just from seeing Emi's excitement about all of this, that you know that it's worth doing. And for all of you who are wondering, are we going to get her back for a proper during the concert season, um, the complete Bach concert? Of course we are. I would be stupid not to. She is just one of those great musicians. So Emi, thank you very much. I will see you all for the next one. And we've had a little hiatus, but we're going about to ramp up all the different podcasts soon. Okay, we will see you all later. Thank you.